Hey, Ronnie Jr.
I want to talk about how New York City has played a role in you being such a fierce performer. But like to be a great
Mhm.
performer is one thing, but to like have the business sensibility, we all know being in New York City that keeps you on your toes. You and I both, you know, on the Uptown A, 145th style. Like it's just tell me about why New York was the place you had to be, even beyond coming to the city in '99. So what was the attraction initially to the city, and just speak to how great it is.
Well, I actually came to New York City in 1998. Um, I think New York City, for me at the time when I moved to New York City, it just really represented a change from, a smaller town back home. And my sights were actually Philadelphia. That's where I really wanted to move. I applied to college in Philadelphia, and I didn't get into art school in Philadelphia, but I got into art school in New York. So I was like, well, I guess I'll go to New York. And so at the time, had I had my choice, I probably would have moved to Philly, which is still one of my true loves. I think it's a wonderful city. And I think in a way it's kind of a smaller, like little kid sister to New York City. Um, I remember just wanting to be around queer people, around a mix of different types of people that were artistic and creative, and also mixing that with an opportunity to perform was what I wanted to do. So initially I was trying to do that in Philly. It didn't work. And so I moved to New York. When I first moved to New York, I was so depressed. I mean, I remember my very first day, I got into my college dorm, my family dropped me off, and then like they just were like, okay, love you, all this noise, commotion, and then they closed the door and it was like silence.
Wow.
And it was that weird silence that wasn't really silent because like I could hear like the buzzing of the electric like light above my head. You could hear like the sounds of New York City, but it was like so lonely.
Mhm.
And so like it wasn't my favorite place the first night. But then of course being in a creative environment, going to art school, being around dancers and actors and things, I was able to kind of really make myself at home. And it really wasn't more than a couple of weeks before I was like, okay, what else can we get into? That's when I discovered New York City nightlife, and then everything, the rest is history.
Yeah.
I got into the nightlife scene and was able to work. I was working at the Tunnel primarily, but I worked at Limelight and you name it. I was there. If it was open, I was at the club. And so that was my main kind of source because I even realized then I went to school for acting and musical theater to basically be on Broadway. And I realized, or it was apparent to me at the time that even then, who I was and kind of what I was serving wasn't really what they were looking for on Broadway at the moment.
Mhm.
And so, really, like gay bars and clubs and drag was my real outlet.
Yeah.
And
Were
one of the
you
things that I
were you
discovered
almost let the work speak for itself because you know that it'll be received in a different way. There's less red tape maybe with the nightlife. Is that kind of what it is?
as a well, definitely there's less red tape or a different kind of tape. It's more of a transparent tape. Um, uh, Compared to let's say Broadway or other things. But one of the things that was really cool that I noticed about um, New York was I was at the club, and the club was the great equalizer. We were all there at the club, but I was meeting people that were in the club, people that were, other actors, other singers and dancers, musicians. I was meeting people who were painters and visual artists. I was meeting people who were chefs, who were in the cooking and they were into fashion,
Yep.
and people who were mechanics. Honestly, every walk of life, and we were all in the club. And this person in the corner is wearing a green wig and is a fabulous queen, but they're also a lawyer during the day. And so
Yeah.
people were bringing all of these different skills into nightlife. And that was one of the things that I really thought was cool about New York City nightlife and New York City drag was that you get, of course, there's queens that are lip sync, you know, assassins or, great dancers. But then there's also people who would just do fashion who don't perform at all. And I had never seen that before, kind of where I came up and kind of when I started doing drag and back in Philadelphia, everyone kind of had the same cookie cutter. And so it was really interesting to see that there's queens in New York who are doing so well and really making a name for themselves, and they all had these different skills. And that's when I realized New York is kind of a magnet for all of these different skills. And then you end up, since you're in there with each other, you end up acquiring some of these skills that you're sharing kind of through osmosis, and you learn.
Everyone
So I think,
steps up. Yeah.
exactly. And I think so drag race. So
Nightlife. Yeah.
it's kind of a wonderful kind of training ground and proving ground for really honing your talent and honing your skills. I think there's a reason, no shade, but I really do think the current of the flow, the current, it goes from New York to Los Angeles rather than the opposite. I think there's more people going from New York to other places than there are from other places to New York. I mean, in terms of like their final destination.
Yeah.
And so everybody in LA lived in New York at one time.
I think you have to
There's a lot of people in New York who've never lived in LA.
You have to nourish those skills in a place like that. I mean, obviously nowhere near what you're talking about back in the older days, but even just like, you know, me being, when did I get out there? Around 2011, 2012. I always think of like a show like a Keisha Carr Sunday night show at Industry is like, I've seen it probably like 3 or 4 times. And what is so fascinating is like, you know, Keisha, the bearded bitch, is like when she's performing, I've never seen her at any other venues, but I've seen that specific Sunday night show. And it's so amazing to me because you know that everyone that is there for an 11 o'clock Sunday night show, I think it is, they're there, and you see everyone maybe who you know, some Broadway kids, you see some fashion people, like it makes her have to perform at a higher level because it's not just an audience who are like, whoa, I'm buzzed, I want to watch some drag. Like this audience is, I don't know, I always, that's to me one of the greater shows that still does exist in New York City at this point.
You see a lot of people from all different walks of life, and like you said, they make you perform at a higher caliber. And even before you get to the stage, just the experience of living in New York City, chances are your apartment is smaller than anybody else's apartment in the entire country. You are trying to pump out the same amount of looks with less resources, and we have more resources in terms of being able to source material and get things from other places and stores and go right down the street. But we have so much less space to kind of literally spread our wings that, you know, I mean, it wasn't, I know there's lots of queens that we hear of today that a lot of the people may know, and I certainly was the only queen at the time that I knew of. When I was getting ready and going to my job to get in drag every single week at Lips, 2 or 3 times a week, Lips restaurant, I was doing my makeup on the subway. That was just where I had to do it because it didn't make sense to try to do it at home. I just do it on the subway. Bring your kit, put it on your lap, and just sit in the corner and do it on the subway. And that's like something that most people wouldn't even think of doing or be able to do, but it is, it's really, it made me really quick at doing my makeup.